Agora, atenção para a pergunta.
E agora desliga! Tá pegando fogo, bicho!
Anuncie 32244000.
Pelos poderes de Bombril.
Generally, the genre is an online series that uses the aesthetic or format of old like VHS tapes or camcorders, old like at this point outdated technology to tell the story and to add in some way to the horror of it.
Tired of only experiencing natural emotions? Or maybe interested in expanding your emotional palette? Cutting-edge brain mapping technology has not only allowed us to refine existing emotions, but has also allowed for the creation of new emotions and emotional experiences. With Thalasson Plus, experience emotions beyond previous natural capabilities. These new emotions include degrance, humber, nage, dorselessness, Andric, Veronation.
There's certain things that you can use as a jumping off point where people will sort of start to understand it. I'll a lot of times introduce it to people who aren't really in the community with like, it's sort of like the Blair Witch Project, which is like a movie that most people that I'll talk to will know about.
July 30th, 1999. A small film with only a budget of $60,000 premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. A horror film whose story was told through the characters' found tapes. That movie was The Blair Witch Project. While not the first found footage movie made, The Blair Witch Project popularized the format of the found footage genre.
The film had a very unique marketing campaign for the time. They wanted to create as much uncertainty as possible when marketing the movie, so that nobody really knew whether or not the film was an actual documentary. They even made a full website with evidence from a fake police investigation and tons of behind-the-scenes information. And all of this happened when the internet was in its infancy. Nobody knew what to believe.
Even trying to describe what the format is, about how it's not just a movie that you sit down and watch, the fact that like it's so cryptic and confusing, and that's like part of it. And especially with a lot of the aspects of why it's scary go all the way back to early internet horror, like even creepypastas, I think.
Smile Dog, the photo with the power to kill.
It's the Slender Man! This modern monster has captured the attention of millions.
Essa última foto é a foto real de Jeff o assassino. Então é verdade que existe uma versão amaldiçoada do jogo Zelda.
I think about all of the creepypasta like faces and images, Jeff the Killer and Smile Dog and stuff. Those stuff were so huge, and now you see analog horror using like the big scary smiles and stuff in it all the time. There's like all of this years and years of context that a lot of people are going into it that some people aren't going into it with. So it is definitely difficult because there's often a lot of explaining you have to do of like where certain things even come from before they have the baseline to even know what's going on when you show it to them. And it's not just random text and like weird images on screen.
Senta que lá vem a história.
A internet dava muito medo para os nossos pais, considerando o fato de que a gente estava ali tendo uma relação, tipo, 20 centímetros de distância de uma tela, porque você sabe que é um portal. Para quê? Para tudo, talvez, né?
Tinha um aspecto místico, né? Porque você não sabe onde você vai parar. Você tá navegando no vídeo da garota no espelho, 5 passos para você cair num live leak da vida e ver uma coisa que você não deveria. Se você tá na Wikipédia, tem até o jogo, né? Você vai clicando nos hiperlinks até chegar no bagulho mais asqueroso que você conseguir.
Especialmente no início, né, e ao longo dos anos 2000, acho que antes de virar realmente cercadinhos, a internet era esse lugar de acesso democrático à informação e todo tipo de informação, então essas possibilidades também. Eu estava lendo sobre a dopamina, o hormônio é liberado quando você tem a promessa de que você vai encontrar alguma coisa, então é o aviso da notificação de que, enfim, alguém te mandou uma mensagem. Mas anteriormente isso era assim um link azul que você não clicou com um título, com um endereço interessante, sabe? Eu acho que era essa aventura assim de poder se deparar com o inesperado, né?
Nossa, todas essas coisas assim são um charme da internet que a gente não tem tanto assim em outros meios, né? Porque quando você tá com um livro na mão, um filme, você tá restrito a isso. A internet é muito, muito grande.
Something about like people who grew up with online horror content, the ability to actually learn how to make that stuff at a younger age, the accessibility of that through the internet has inspired most of the huge things, like a lot of the big things going on right now. Marble Hornets, for instance, is one that a lot of creators now credit as like huge inspirations to them. And that was like in 2009. So a bunch of people when they were like kids or teenagers, and they're now like 18, 20, that sort of age. Marble Hornets was made by a much bigger team of people, and it was a much larger scale project, but people, like even just single individuals, saw that and have used it to make things like the Walton Files or the Mandela Catalog, where there are these huge pieces of content that were inspired by like that first wave of online horror content, and now they're like exceeding a lot of that stuff in quality, but being made by like one person because just it's so much more accessible to work on now.
He's tall, thin, faceless, and wears a dark suit. Once he's in your life, you're doomed. If you try to learn more about him or even think about him, it only makes it easier for him to find you. He's the notorious internet monster, Slender Man.
I mean, I think there is you can find direct lines to that sort of stuff. For instance, like Slender Man started as a creepypasta where it was a story someone had written out, and then they had these images, and then Marble Hornets made a web series about it. And so many horror web series now are heavily inspired by Marble Hornets that you can trace that all the way back to creepypastas like Slender. The more, now that I'm thinking about it, like the more examples of creepypasta I'm thinking about, like there really just were shorter versions of what people have expanded analog horror and online horror into.
Porque o retrô empresta muito bem para o terror esse negócio do suporte material ser uma coisa propensa às falhas. Se você vê assim as séries da Netflix ou cinema digital recente, tudo tende a ter um pouco o mesmo visual. É esse visual do digital que ele meio que, de certa forma, assim, ele exclui as falhas, ele exclui a materialidade do suporte. E o legal das falhas é que isso é totalmente o gênero do terror.
Digital things being digital, it's so easy to fake things that I think inherently when we see something that looks more analog, it just, even if you know, well, this is not actually a VHS tape, but when it's given that look, it's subconsciously your brain isn't used to seeing things faked on VHS.
Não é só a questão de você ver o ruído da fita magnética. Parece que é um gênero que trabalha com todas as convenções do audiovisual que não são narrativas. Vai trazer essas linguagens que podem ser a linguagem do telejornal, a linguagem do comercial, da campanha informativa, né? Todas essas outras linguagens que a gente também internalizou. Linguagens que hoje já foram atualizadas 1000 vezes e estão muito mais bonitas, mas que ainda continuam lá na nossa memória. Então, esse é o familiar. E aí você tem a inserção do não familiar, do desconhecido, e é o que torna o negócio todo perturbador. É o tal do fator uncanny, o estranho familiar, que é engraçado porque está no conteúdo dos vídeos, mas também está na forma, porque quando entra o terror, tiro e queda, vem o glitch, vem a falha.
More puzzle pieces have been laid out for you. Others are more significant than others. 2 pieces are crucial to slowly achieving the solution. Find the pieces, return them to me, and meet at the intersection. See you soon. End quote. And wouldn't you know it, but sure enough, there's a YouTube link broken in 2 pieces, hidden at both the front and back of the Relocate Project video. Putting them together gives you access to a secret video, lucky you, where everything starts to come together.
I don't think I'm going to get the quote exactly right, but there's a Stephen King quote about, he was describing like what different words, like fear is this and terror is this, but he said horror is coming home and realizing that everything in your house has been replaced with an exact replica, where it's this feeling of like, it's not exactly wrong. It's not something that's yelling danger at you. It's just, you know that something is off. And I think that's what analog horror is able to do so well. And I think the reason it's really good for smaller creators who are only working with a little bit, there's like the whole fear of the unknown, and it allows them to sort of obscure what you're seeing. Like if everything was on a like 4K camera or like a phone camera, which is really high quality, it's so much easier to pick out little details that are wrong. But when you have something so obscured with an analog VHS tape, like you're not ever really seeing the full picture. Things are a little bit blurry and they're static. And for instance, the back rooms, it's all done like through just 3D renders. And I think it'd be way easier to tell that it was 3D if he just made everything look completely crisp and clear. But because he's able to hide it behind the VHS, it just adds a sense of realism. So I think there's it obscures things a little bit, and it lets you sort of fill in the gaps in your head almost, is one way that I think analog horror does that.
É clássico, assim, né? Como a Bruxa de Blair não tem a própria bruxa, você não a vê. Mas só a sugestão, assim, das forças malignas acontecendo naquela floresta e também a performance dos atores, principalmente, te vende aquilo completamente. E no terror analógico você tem formas um pouco difíceis de definir. Você tem muito da escuridão, e a escuridão a gente sabe que, tendo pouca luz, a definição cai muito. E aí que eu acho um negócio muito legal disso tá no YouTube também, é que no fim, além de tudo isso, a própria compressão do YouTube agrega em ocultar o que não é para ser visto, sabe? Então, é uma fusão interessante, né? É um terror analógico, mas a gente não pode esquecer que tem o digital.
Let me in, Mark. I have a gift for you. I have a present. I have a surprise. I will not hurt you.
You fucking bastard!
Disturbing psychological horror that just creeps under your skin and stays there.
What does it truly mean to be human?
Traditional Lovecraftian imagery. Tortured souls trying to find rest.
The horror, the guilt, the disbelief.
Biggest fear is being forgotten.
You likely have no idea what the whole picture is.
I think a lot of it shows in the fact that analog horror, you could say there's some exceptions, like the Walton Files does use gore sometimes, but in general, a lot of it is just more about like a mounting sense of dread and Lovecraftian themes to everything. Somewhere, I don't remember where I had said it, but I've said that like I think analog horror sometimes overuses the like alien or like existential threat, but I think there's a reason that people come back to using it, because that is what is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, being like just something unstoppable, which I think is what a lot of people are feeling like the state of the world is. 。 . 。 。 。 . 。 . 。。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 。 . 。 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。
. 。 . 。 . 。 . 。
At the same time, I think analog horror is almost like an escape from that, because you're looking at something scary that is not real. To engage in it, all you need is to be able to watch the thing, because the point of seeing the analog horror like tapes is that the story behind that is that you're seeing them. So it really is like you are living it. It's sort of a mix of like, when it comes to the people creating it, they're creating it from a place of that nihilism and existentialism. And then as people are consuming it, they're almost using it as a way to, it's a way to escape from the real life versions of that and process it in a way that is like, okay, but this isn't real. So it's easier to deal with because this isn't actually real.
Okay, the date is June 12th, 2009. This is the last broadcast. 1 minute. This is the last thing broadcasted at analog TV.
Watch, it's gonna be like porn or something like. Here, let's get pictures of each other. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3. Right.
Okay, now we're gonna sit in front of the TV and watch it. It's gonna go out. No more analog!
Yeah,
no more
TV's
analog!
done!
Little Bon has been waiting all day for his friends to arrive. He is planning to have...
Vou atrás desse conteúdo, desse entretenimento, justamente para me divertir, para ter essa sensação nostálgica, para ver se eu tenho esse rush que eu tive quando eu tinha 7 anos e comecei a desbravar o mundo do terror.
E esses vídeos de busca, né, por esse material ainda é uma prova de que a gente deseja, assim, pelo menos que existam essas histórias meio horripilantes, sabe? Que deixam a gente curioso e um pouco assustado, mas animado também, né?
Whether that's because it's of nostalgia or just because the actual people themselves are younger. Like, there's very few that I can think of that maybe play with a lot of the fears of like adulthood. I think that's one of the ways that it can draw people in. And I think it's another reason why it can also be really subjective, where some people, even fans of analog horror, will be really divided on which ones they actually like, especially because they're like one person a lot of the time working on these. It's such an individual experience that they're bringing like specific things from their childhood to the series that maybe wouldn't affect some people in the same way. To a degree, I almost think it was inevitable that was going to happen, because that is now becoming the nostalgia. Like, early 2000s is now becoming the nostalgic aspect. It does start looking at like, what genre do these things actually fall in now? Where does that cutoff happen? But what I think is so interesting is analog horror, I think, is a much broader term, because right now it's mostly focused on the VHS look, which makes sense because a lot of people grew up with VHS tapes and there's something about that that is creepy. But when you go to analog, when you just think about the term analog horror, it's supposed to give off the feeling that it's not digital. It's like an analog piece of equipment. I think because of how early in its stages it is, I think we're going to see a lot more creativity with what counts as being analog horror, like making something that's supposed to sound like it's coming out of an actual radio could be analog horror. I've workshopped with a couple people this idea before, it being something like a toy, like a Tamagotchi, there being something behind that, like any non-digital format could be turned into analog horror. And even though right now it's mostly the VHS look, I think it's just starting, and we're going to see a lot more creative ways to use like analog technology to tell stories like that. I feel like so many movies now, they seem almost calculated by a studio to hit all of the same marks and be the exact same way because they know it'll make money, but it means that they're not that creative because, you know, horror movies are made really cheap and then they make a bunch of money and then nobody remembers them. But with horror web series, a lot of these projects have the ability to have the freedom to do what they want. Basically, they have way more freedom to do whatever it is they have in their head. If they can make it by themselves, obviously they have less resources, but if they can do it, they just do it, and it allows like so many more unique styles.
Então assim, tá rolando muita coisa se você souber onde procurar. Se a gente só olhar para a sala de cinema Cinemark, não tá ruim, mas tem muita coisa legal acontecendo nos cantos escuros por aí.
Like how much further? Like
A little more. A little more.
You got?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa!
Tired of only experiencing natural emotions?
Wake up, Joseph. Wake up, wake up, wake up.
Climb inside the torso and accept your death.
Rerouting. Make a U-turn. Your destination is behind you.